Welcome to part 4 of the executive branch and the presidency. Today we're going to look at checks on the president, the expansion of presidential power, presidential communication and the impact it has on the American people. So if you haven't checked out the other videos, I would encourage you to do so. Part 1 is on the roles and powers of the president. We look at the Electoral College in part 2, and then all the president's staff. Who helps the president on a daily, monthly, and annual basis? We look at all of the president's staff in part 3. But today we're going to look at the checks on the president and the expansion of presidential power, so I'm glad you're here. Let's talk about presidential appointments, this idea of different cabinet members being appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. We have ambassadors that serve in consulates and embassies around the world, doing the work of the president on the president's behalf and with that agenda around the world in helping, again, confirmed by the Senate. We have White House staff, the people that work closest to the president, don't need Senate confirmation, but very loyal to the president. They are closest in physical proximity to the president, and they're really important in terms of carrying out the president's agenda and helping to get that done. We see federal judges also requiring Senate confirmation, but again, having the longest influence because of the role that they play. They serve for life, and so they'll be there long after the president and his administration have packed their bags and left the White House. We continue to see that federal judges are on the bench serving lifetime appointments. So when a Senate rejects a candidate, whether it's a cabinet member, we saw this with John Tower, or a potential Supreme Court justice, we saw this with Robert Bork. We see a lot of the appointment process in terms of checks and balances at work. And this is the role that the Senate plays. The power to say, no, that's not someone that is going to... that we're going to approve of, and so we are going to deny that appointment. So for the most part, presidents usually get their cabinet appointments through for the most part. It's more in judges that we would see this. It's very rare that you would see a cabinet member that's vetoed, and that's why you see here John Tower was the first since 1959 in terms of the role play there. So in 30 years it was the first cabinet member that was actually vetoed by the Senate in terms of the role that they play there. Now, another check on the president here would be impeachment. Remember, it's the House that impeaches. The Senate holds the trial. And you would need 2/3 of senators, essentially 67 senators, to vote to convict. Otherwise, the president is acquitted or basically free to go, and innocent, if you will. The question always remains, what is treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors? And again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So it only takes a majority in the House to impeach a president. We've done that 3 times: Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump. And in each of those times, none of them have been convicted in the Senate. Andrew Johnson was the closest to come. He won that trial, was acquitted with 1 vote to spare. So this is kind of amorphous in terms of what is treason, what is bribery, what is other high crimes and misdemeanors, and that really is where we really don't know, and the Senate is left to make that determination as to what rises to that level. I guess the House, in terms of impeaching, which again means to bring up on charges, the judges are more often impeached and convicted, and usually it's on corruption charges that we would see them, but presidents have not been convicted. They have been impeached, and Nixon always comes up here. Nixon was never impeached. Impeachment proceedings did start, but the full impeachment, the vote on impeachment, never got to the House. He resigned before that actually took place. So the vice president then becomes the president of the United States, but Nixon never got that far. He resigned before that actually happened. And there was a whole kerfuffle behind the scenes about, well, how does a president resign? How does a president step down? It's not like there was protocol in place. And then they figured out, well, you've got to send on White House letterhead, stationery, you've got to send a letter to the Secretary of State. At this point would be Kissinger, informing the Secretary that the president had resigned. And so that's why that's such a a momentous document of history that we see there. But let's talk more about, for a moment, some of the aspects of foreign policy in terms of the president carrying out their wishes and expanding some power here. We see a lot of reach in terms of domestic policy that the president takes, but there's also some tension here because Congress declares war, but the president can send in troops. So as commander-in-chief, you're basically rallying around the flag to send troops into harm's way in some cases, into war zones, into natural disasters, and you're negotiating treaties, you're negotiating executive agreements with diplomats in other countries around the world, and trying to find a place at which you can find agreement, where you can sign a treaty or an executive agreement or a trade agreement, which essentially is an executive agreement. So there's lots of places where the president has the advantage there. But remember, Congress has a lot of checks, if you will, informally, but checks on the president here in terms of what power he has. And then one of the most important is declaring war and the power of the purse. I would say those two kind of go hand in hand. You're going to declare war, you got to provide money in order to do it. If there's no declaration of war, well, then the power of the purse, maybe not so urgent that money is allocated for that particular purpose. But the president can't come up with money on his own. He's going to need Congress to help him in that effort. So it's really Congress's ability to appropriate and authorize that money that gives the president the ability to send those troops in. Also remember that the Senate ratifies treaties here. They're going to confirm cabinet secretaries. They are providing a check on the president in terms of who he is putting in charge of the State Department as Secretary of the State. He is putting in charge as Secretary of Defense who is in charge of military readiness. So there's a lot of Senate role there that is weighing in to check the president's decision making to make sure that that they are falling in line with what the American people want, not just what the president wants to do. And then a lot of oversight here in terms of hearings, calling in people to testify, experts, heads of agencies. All of this is really allowing Congress to check the president in terms of making sure that whatever foreign policy the president wants to move forward with is being checked in Congress to make sure that there is a check and that somebody's watching. Okay, we talked about the War Powers Resolution in the previous video, and the idea here is just that the president needs to inform Congress within 48 hours of any type of military action. The president then has 60 days to basically ask Congress to basically authorize action to move forward or to bring troops home. And then if Congress doesn't want to authorize, the president can inform them and get an additional 30 days to withdraw those troops. So essentially limiting the president to that 60-day window with a little bit of 30-day grace period. But the president is very limited in terms of what the president can do if Congress doesn't get on board. So that's why it's so important when you're going to commit to troops to any type of military situation that you have members of Congress informed and hopefully on board with your mission, with what your agenda is, because otherwise it's going to be a very ugly situation. Now, this hasn't been constitutionally tested, I would mention here. Because the idea here is, does this violate separation of powers? I mean, we saw that with the line item veto, where the Supreme Court said the line item veto, the Congress overstepped its authority by giving the president too much power of lawmaking. Are they taking too much power away of the commander-in-chief by limiting the president to this? And the answer is unknown, because we really don't know. They haven't really gone forward with a case in which the Supreme Court has weighed in on this issue, many cases because both branches don't want to know the result in terms of what happens there. But we have seen this play out over time in terms of like the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. How does the president get enough power to send in troops, but then Congress wants to pull back on that, and the War Powers Act of 1973 was essentially that pullback of that power, giving the president too much power that led us into war. We see this after 9/11 with the resolution here in terms of trying to prevent or trying to authorize force, but trying to also prevent any longevity of war happening and taking place, because we're already in Afghanistan as a result of that. We see this in the Libya airstrikes. We see this in a number of cases, and the list goes on and on and on in terms of the role that the Congress plays in moving forward to question and limit the president's authority, to check that authority, but also to make sure that the role and the will of the American people is being carried out. Okay, so now let's look at how those powers have expanded over time in terms of some roles here. We have seen the growth of the presidency in terms of what the framers and the anti-federalists really feared. Is the president too strong of a force that no one can really, there's really no check on what the president does? Ron Paul basically said this best. The idea the people like a strong president. How can I run for president and say I want to be a weak president? But you know what the answer to that is? We need a strong president, strong enough to resist the temptation of taking power that a president shouldn't have. And so this is really, and if you know Ron Paul, he's a very libertarian sort of Republican. This is Rand Paul's father, served in the House for many, many years, and he basically looked at government as being too involved in many things and not getting out of the way so that the economy and business and people can kind of live their lives. And so when he was asked this question, he was kind of walking a tightrope. But it is an important one here because it shows how the framers were also thinking. Remember, they didn't see the presidency as being the dominant branch. They saw Congress as being the dominant branch, and the presidency as really carrying out the agenda. We don't see that today. We see much more where the president is setting the agenda and Congress is serving as a check on that. But has it gone too far where there isn't enough of a check on that? And that's really the concerns that Hamilton was trying to address in Federalist No. 70. And if you haven't read it yet, I encourage you to check it out. There's also a video on what you need to know about Federalist 70 that Carrie Lamanna has. You can click on the link in the chapter notes that'll take you there. And there's also a guide to that in terms of Federalist 70, kind of showcasing this. But the importance here is Hamilton was really arguing against a team, kind of what we see in China today as the Central Committee, as seeing a team of executives and really seeing one executive, a unitary executive that would be one person actually carrying out, rather than ruling by a committee in terms of how to carry out the executive branch functions. Hamilton really didn't see that as effective. He certainly didn't see that as quick. If you're going to rule by committee, you got to bring all these people together. They all have to be informed the same, and then they have to vote on it and talk about it. Well, that's essentially the Supreme Court, right? You have 9 members that get together and they write opinions, and then they belabor those opinions, and they talk about those opinions, and they go back and forth. They didn't envision the executive branch being in that capacity. They saw one person being in charge, being able to make the decisions, and everybody else within the branch following it. And that really was the driver of Hamilton's argument of a unitary, a single executive in the Federalist Papers in Federalist 70 there. So the president has the power to say no. Does Congress have the power to say no? Well, this is one example where the president is being told no, and this came out of the post-Watergate era, in which impoundment of funds was an act passed by Congress to say, hey, if you're not going to use the money, then give it back, and or at least inform us that you're not going to use the money for that purpose. We, as Congress, have 45 days to move the spending somewhere else. And then if we don't do that in 45 days, then you can spend the money wherever you want. But you have to give Congress the power because we have the power of the purse. And courts have upheld that particular structure in saying that the power of impounding funds is Congress's power of the purse. They have the right to give the money. They have the right to take it back in terms of those aspects. Let's talk about some expanding power here in terms of acting appointments versus recess appointments and regular appointments. We've kind of talked about the regular appointments. They're confirmed by the Senate. And the question is, what happens when Senate's out of session? Well, a recess appointment can take place, and the president can basically bypass that confirmation process by putting someone in immediately that can serve out the rest of the president's term in that role. That's a recess appointment. You bypass the Senate entirely. The Senate obviously doesn't like that, which is why they don't recess much anymore. But then you also have this acting appointments, and we've seen President Trump use this particular aspect quite a bit. We have a lot of acting secretaries and a lot of acting assistant secretaries in roles that have never been confirmed by the Senate. And that is because the president wanted to move them in quickly, didn't want or didn't feel like they maybe could pass the Senate's muster. And I don't know, it depends on the particular individual, but wanted to bypass that process entirely, and so appointed them to acting positions, which they can serve in during the remainder of the administration, and only until then, and then their time is up. But we have seen the president kind of expand the role that he plays here by providing these appointments, because there is no check on these appointments. We don't know who these acting appointments are in terms of who is basically serving in these roles, and what they're bringing to the table in terms of background checks and that kind of thing. Not a lot of that stuff has been done. So could that have an impact in terms of expanding the president's power? It definitely could. And we see the case in both recess and acting appointments where the president has more power as a result of having, if you don't have a check on that power, you're more likely to appoint people that otherwise may not make it through the Senate process. And there have been some controversial ones in the acting appointments where that has been seen to be the case. Now, another area to kind of check the president's expansion of power was the 22nd Amendment. We know FDR, as seen down there, was elected to not one term or two terms, but four. And after that, the 22nd Amendment was passed by Congress and two-thirds of Congress and three-fourths of states, amending the Constitution, basically saying that the president is limited to serve two terms, two four-year terms, or 10 years if they've come into office in the middle of a resignation or a death or an assassination or something. And so this limits the president's power because he can only serve two terms. With history, FDR said he didn't want to run or be nominated. He wanted the people to do it, and they essentially nominated him to those roles. That was really the power that he played there, that they played, not that he played. And so he really saw that as the power of the people to move forward and elect him again to a third or fourth term. Well, he died, a month into his fourth term. Harry Truman, the senator from Missouri, becoming the next president of the United States. And that is what led to the 22nd Amendment. So there are arguments to be made for whether or not that should have happened. The Reagan Republicans were very disappointed in the 22nd Amendment when Reagan came along. They wanted him to serve longer because of the economic prosperity that had happened as a result of tax bills and economic policies that have been passed during that point. Democrats did the same in the 1990s into 2000, lamented the 22nd Amendment because of Bill Clinton and the economic prosperity that ensued during his administration. With the tech boom and whatnot. So there are arguments for and against. It all depends. Again, beauty's in the eye of the beholder in terms of whether the 22nd Amendment is right or wrongly in those positions, but it is here to stay, and until it's amended, which we know is very hard to do, it is going to be with us. Now let's shift gears and talk about presidential communication as we close out this part of the chapter on the executive branch and the presidency. You probably heard me talk quite a bit about the bully pulpit, so let's talk about what that is. The bully pulpit is essentially a pulpit being a podium that a preacher would stand at and kind of preach to you on Sunday morning about the importance of religious scripture or whatnot. And the term kind of came about from the president kind of doing the same, using their power of the presidency to get up and speak about the issues they feel are important. They do this with authority. They are the president of the United States. There are 535 members of Congress. Try following all of them, but there's only one president. and it's much easier to follow one person than it is 500 people. So that's why we see the media paying so much attention to this one person that oversees, again, a bureaucracy of 4 million people. That is significant in terms of when that president speaks, people listen, and they listen to what they have to say. And that tends to change the agenda of what the media talk about, what Congress is doing, and what the American people are focused on. And that really is the importance of the bully pulpit. Presidents use this for good. They also use this for not so good. We can see them kind of deflecting on issues that they don't want the press to be talking about, so they'll talk about something else, kind of the tail wags the dog, so to speak. And they'll also address this in terms of what issues do we really want the American people to be focused on? What do we want people to be talking about? You know, in 2020, we see that Joe Biden wants to talk about coronavirus. He's already come out with a task force. The media is paying attention to President-elect Biden, and we see that playing out. And we've seen presidents do this time after time in terms of trying to focus on the issues that they want to carry out, the issues they want to focus on as president, and bring that to the American people to get them to weigh in on it, rather than letting the media kind of set the agenda. So the president really sees the authority here in terms of setting that agenda. We saw President Reagan do this in the 80s, talking about taxes. We've got to get taxes under control. We've got to work on this tax reduction plan. And it involved, by the way, raising taxes before they could lower them, which was very controversial, which is why the president wanted to address the nation. So President Reagan, speaking from the Oval Office back then, trying to address the issue because of the importance of the issue and how it did go against the grain in terms of some of the aspects he was elected on, but he thought it was important enough to talk directly to the American people, to tell them what was happening and why. And that really kind of set the stage, and ultimately led in 1984 to his reelection, his landslide reelection victory in the Electoral College. Presidents use the State of the Union address in order to do this as well. We've seen these nationally televised events as a way to kind of set the agenda for Congress. Again, they're the chief legislator, so they're setting the agenda. Congress, I want you to do this in this year ahead. I really would love to see a bill on X, and if you can give me a bill on X that focuses on X, then I will sign that bill. That's a really important statement, really sends a message to Congress in terms of what the president is willing to work with them on, and how the president can go about doing so. And then he's going to, as we talked about, he's going to send forth the congressional liaisons from the White House in order to lobby the members of Congress in order to help try and carry that out in terms of trying to get those bills passed. The president's also going to go on the road, is going to speak to the American people, going to invite people to the White House and talk to them, because that's one of their most important aspects. They got elected this way, by appealing to the American people, by talking directly to the public. Why is it President Trump loves to use Twitter? Because it's a direct connection to the American people and his base. And he really values that approach and that power of persuasion by tweet. President Obama also focusing on the importance of connecting with people and getting people to see that he's human. The little boy touching his head to see, hey, his hair's just like mine. He's just like me. And really kind of parlaying that into the agenda that they want to accomplish by winning the American people over. We also see this mobilization of support in trying to motivate the public. Call your congressman, call your senator, tell them you're supporting this issue and you want them to help us. Now, sometimes this doesn't have the intended effect, but most of the time it really does. It really leads a lot of people to call up members of Congress, really applies a lot of pressure and gets them to focus on what the president's trying to get them to do. Now, what presidents can actually do actually differs a lot from what people think that the president can do. We can see this here. The president can part the ocean and move mountains and do all kinds of things in terms of roles. But remember, just like Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, he had a Democratic Congress. His hands were tied. He had to compromise in order to get anything done. And so raising taxes may not have been his first approach, his first idea, but he did it in order to get through the wilderness so that he could get beyond it in order to carry out the rest of his agenda. And he went to the American people to tell them why he took this approach. That is a very a very remarkable aspect of trying to get in front of the American people and to win over the American people, not going directly to Congress in terms of trying to get that. Even though I'm sure a lot of that was happening behind the scenes, we've seen that happen time and again. But they're really trying to set the agenda here. They're really trying to use their power of persuasion to get the media to pay attention, to get the members of Congress to pay attention, to get the American people to pay attention, and to get all of them on board with what the president's agenda is in order to pass legislation that can help the American people. That really is the driver. As we've talked about previously, opinion polls matter. The honeymoon period is alive and well. We know that approval ratings, you're never going to see, in a lot of cases, you're never going to see an approval rating as high as you are in the first couple of years of your term. People tend to wane, especially if you're elected to a second term. You're never going to see those same numbers again. We saw this time and again. People get tired and weary. The 7-year itch kicks in. So by the 8th year, they're done with you. They're ready to move on. That honeymoon period tends to shrink as we welcome new presidents into the fold. Midterms are brutal on presidents. Usually they lose offices. We see a significant number of House seats lost by the president's party in midterm elections, between presidential elections. And in lame duck periods, it's really hard for the president to do a whole lot. So now we've entered a period in which, based on projections, President Trump has not conceded, but President Trump, based on those projections, they've projected that Vice President Biden is now president-elect. That essentially makes President Trump a lame duck in terms of his term of office is expiring, and on January 20th at noon will have expired, and the new president will take the oath of office. So that has an impact on the president's agenda and what the president can accomplish. Now, presidents now use social media very heavily, as we know. President Trump using Twitter. We saw President Obama using a different BlackBerry device for the campaign than he did for the official White House work that he did. Presidents like being able to access the technology. They like to be able to respond quickly to issues that come to the fore. And we can see here from the chart, the Twitter use is ramped up from where the president started. It was in the 600s or so in terms of the number of tweets per month. We reached a peak in 2020 of over 1,200, in which the president more than doubled what he was tweeting back in 2016. Again, as time moves on and people are less enamored and you're losing approval ratings and popularity, you may want to take to Twitter to try and convince them of that, and that could be the reason for the ramp up there in terms of what we see. Who knows? But at any rate, presidents use all kinds of communication in order to try and win over the American people, win over members of Congress, and win over everyone to their agenda. So remember these questions we started off with. Well, see how good you could do at the end in talking about, after viewing all 4 videos, see how well you can do in terms of how well you now know the executive branch. I hope you'll pause and take a moment to do that, and I hope you found these videos helpful. We're going to be, we're hoping you're finding all 4 of these videos helpful. We'll be coming back with the top 12 highlights from this chapter, and then we'll be moving on to the bureaucracy. So we'll see you over there in the agencies, departments, and corporations.